Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. As you can see, I'm traveling again. This time I'm in Estonia and I'm meeting with a lot of the people that are supporting Ukraine here. So I will be having an updates on that and you will see more videos coming to you soon. But for now, let's dive in quickly about the situation on the front lines in Ukraine. So there are a couple additional news coming from Ukrainian armed forces with regards to their operation in Kursk. Most notably, Ukrainians have reported additional advances on these northern directions right over here around Pogrebki and Malolokhnya. And Russians have been reporting the fighting in the areas. One of the major things that Russians are not reporting from this area is that they are not reporting liberation of any kind of settlements or pushing Ukrainians out of anything. I don't think that there are major offensive activities by Ukraine in this area right now, but smaller tactical level advances are still happening. From time to time, we still hear that Ukrainians are taking over certain new parts of the front line, but for now, it is all comparatively slow, and we can now fully agree that the front line more or less has settled in the Kursk region. With a small caveat, and the War Monitor here echoes a lot of the other things that I'm also hearing on the Russian channels, is that we are seeing more and more various brigades appearing on the Kursk direction. We talked a little bit today with Ragnar from the 69th Sniffing Brigade about what it could be. There are a couple of options. One is that some of these units are known to how to create good solid defenses against the Russian units, but then the question is why the K2 is there, because K2 is also very capable offensive battalion. It's something that Ukraine has used when they were conducting offensive on different areas. Ragnar also said that potentially Ukraine is rotating some of the forces to the Kursk region because it's helping to boost the morale of the Ukrainian units, because after fighting in a defensive posture on the Pokrovsk direction for this whole time, a lot of the Ukrainian troops, it's kind of morally also difficult for them that they are fighting a defensive war. So it's lifting their spirit and it's clearing their heads when they have to fight more of an offensive manner. So there can be various explanations for this, but still, we're seeing the 47th Brigade, we're seeing the K2, we're seeing Magyarsberg. So some very, very well-known units, one can say elite units, are being operational on the Kursk area. Additional, there has been some Russian movements around the Pishene direction in the east. This is threatening, but so far not critical. Ukrainians are reporting that the advances that Russians have had, like these small appendices that Ukraine now needs to contain, are not nice. But generally speaking, the situation here is perceived as it's okay for now, but we're going to monitor the situation as it develops. A more positive news we're hearing from the areas of Toretsk. Here, the Azov Brigade came in towards Nelipivka in New York, on this area over here. And Azov Brigade has been operational in the area and they were able to push the Russians out of the part of New York. There has been additional advances claimed by the Ukrainian armed forces. So the situation around Toretsk looks that it is not as critical as it was perceived a little bit before. There is heavy fighting that is being reported right now around the area of Chasiv Yar. This is towards the Bakhmut front line. Here the most notable is this small crossing from the Kalinivka area towards the Chasiv Yar area. But the fighting there is reported to be extremely heavy. And while the Russians for now are controlling this part, it is said that the advances, even if they are marginal. And again, I want to underscore that right now, Chasiv Yar is not semi-encircled. There is nothing right now in the north of Chasiv Yar that is threatening it. There is nothing right now on the south of Chasiv Yar that is threatening it. So if Russians would want to go through Chasiv Yar directly, then it would be a bloodbath and it would require a lot of resources that Russia just do not have. They do not have the resources. And the situation around Pokrovsk, this is the most difficult one. And here, let's talk about the situation, and I'll explain why it's better than it was before, and why is that. So this pocket around Nevelske, I talked about this in my previous video, and the big problem around Nevelske here is that Nevelske has been a major defensive stronghold for Ukrainians. It has held a lot of the Russian attacks. They were able to basically contain Russians for quite a while, despite the fact that Nevelsk is a small settlement. And the issue was that this big area right over here is a whole field of nothing, so to say, if I can put it like this. And there was a hope that Ukrainians could potentially hold the line between Ukrainsk, Lysivka, Galitsinivka, like this line right over here, but unfortunately the Russians penetrated it through, so I would not be surprised at all to hear in the coming days that Ukrainians have indeed moved out of the settlement, and instead we will see Ukrainians try to establish defensive lines a little bit towards the west from this area. So let's talk about this offensive directions towards Pokrovsk. Russians are still advancing. Remember, 2024, Ukrainians stated that they wanted to be a defensive operation. And overall, the defensive operation has been good. And I've explained this many times, why Russians taking certain villages, settlements, and land in Ukraine, while terrible as a fact, and obviously for the future of Ukraine, that it's more destroyed villages, that more people are dislodged from their houses and so on. But generally speaking, it doesn't change the war. The threat that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago was that if Ukrainians have a defensive line, so some kind of force, and then Russians were able to break through that defensive line, if Russians are able to expand that gap and get more forces to kind of semi-surround Ukrainians and collapse their position, then the key word here that Ukrainians might lose is control. Because when the attacking forces are attacking into the defense of the defensive lines of the defenders, then that moment of while they're attacking is very beneficial. Well, not beneficial, like that's the wrong way to say it. The ratio of losses for the attacker at this state is worse than that for defender. So attacker, they really want to breach that defensive line as fast as possible, so then they can collapse their positions, and in the chaos that created chaos, essentially exploit the problems around the defensive lines. And that was what was happening a couple of weeks ago, at least it seems what was happening. However, with Ukrainians sending in reinforcements, they were able to prevent Russians from further advancements, and they were able to re-establish their defensive lines. So now Russians have the window of opportunity that they had supposedly and claimedly they had with Ukrainian front line collapsing. It's now been closed, and Ukrainians right now are consolidating their defensive. So while it looks still that Russians are advancing, the general perspective is that Ukrainians now have it better than it was a couple of weeks ago. Some really good news from Sweden. The aid package has been announced on the 9th of September of 444 million. And it's a very critical package. It covers a lot of good things. It covers training, the equipment, the infantry fighting vehicles, ammunition. It covers a lot of really good things. It's a big package. But most interesting things is this, the 222 million that will be used to restore an unspecified number of Gripen fighters. So essentially they had some spare parts or older Gripens that were used for spare parts. And now they're just thinking, well, why don't we just use them, the spare parts we have, to reassemble those Gripens and potentially transfer them to Ukraine. So we have, so to say, a first official confirmation that Gripens are considered to be on the way to Ukraine, and I think that is great. Additional big news that hit the internet this week was that the Biden administration trying to save the billions in Ukraine aid. So in the presidential drawdown authority, Biden has availability to spend a lot of money. Biden has been very slow, and he has been very drip feeding Ukraine a lot of these packages. And it has been so slow that now he is on the deadline that by September 30 he must spend 6 billion in military aid in Ukraine before September 30th. So far the spending from Biden towards Ukraine has been very, very timid. I believe there was, after the 40 billion additional support for Ukraine was passed by the Congress, I believe there was one package of over 2 billion, and then there were a couple smaller packages of like 250 billion, 125 billion, and I believe there was maybe another one for 400 billion, but maybe I'm missing. The point that I'm making, that there is still a lot of money that will burn down without being used to help Ukraine unless Biden gets his shit together. I hope that right now there's some negotiations with Congress happening in US. I don't know what needs to be negotiated because the money is there. It is allocated to be helped for Ukraine. But right now, Biden, maybe some internal bureaucracy, maybe, I don't know. We should something to ask Jake why this 6 billion is there, to go in details. But the good news is that it's being looked at, and hopefully we will see a big help package being announced to Ukraine. I really hope that it's going to be the whole 6 billion. And then a couple of real treachery type news. So, I don't like the international organizations. I think they're really bad. And we're seeing more and more proofs of that. So apparently some hackers were able to get their hands on a correspondence between the UN Secretary General Guterres and the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, which is obviously the war criminal. And Guterres has proposed lifting the financial sanctions by the EU, which, why is he talking about EU at all? Not his business. He's in the UN. And then he wants to lift it for certain Russian banks and propose a specialty funded subsidiary of the Russian bank to be connected to the SWIFT system. So what he wants to do is basically create a bank that will go around all of the EU and US sanctions and create this loophole specifically for Russia to conduct some kind of banking operations because they were banned by the EU sanctions. Long story short, Guterres here has been basically working for Russians, trying to find a way to help them circumvent the sanctions that were imposed by the EU and the US. If you still are considering UN as a friend of democracy, please reconsider. Then another treachery kind of news is obviously the discussion about Schultz and leaked discussions about potential proposal for peace in Ukraine, that supposedly Schultz is going to be putting some kind of proposal that will state that Ukraine needs to give certain territories to Russia in some kind of peace negotiated solution. And it's a dead on arrival solution. There is no way it's going to get accepted by Ukrainians whatsoever. So I have troubles believing, don't get me wrong, I don't have trouble believing that maybe somewhere in the back of his mind that he still believes that he can be this peace chancellor that will negotiate some kind of peace. But proposal for quote unquote peace is not peace. It's a interim solution that is not good for anyone. It doesn't end the situation for Ukraine. It doesn't remove the threat of Russian. It is not a solution. It's just a half measure, just so everyone have the ability to then close their eyes, close their ears to whatever is happening to Ukraine or anywhere else. And essentially, it will just compromise the security of Europe and everyone else. I don't see how this potential solution can even remotely start passing. It has been speculated that it's potentially going to be part of the Zelensky's peace proposal platform for the diplomatic peace in Ukraine. But the Zelensky's peace platform very clearly states that there is no land considerations with regards to Ukraine giving certain territories to Russia. Long story short, if Schultz here is looking at the recent elections and looking as the far-right parties have gained popularity in Germany, the only person he has to blame for it is himself and his timid, inconcrete positions and inability to act decisively and strongly against the threats to Germany. His actions so far has put Germany and the European Union in more jeopardized, weaker position than we could have been. So I don't know what he thinks is going to be, but someone very clearly stated this about Scholz, that he's the wrong person in the wrong position at the wrong time. And with all respects to my German viewers, if you're an SPD supporter, I'm sorry, but the record of Chancellor Scholz has not been good. And if you start throwing into my face saying, yeah, but Germany is like the second most supporter of Ukraine, not because of Scholz, despite him. And finally, something very, very personal. The Cardinal Birds, the band that is responsible for the outro song for this channel, Ukraine Matters, one of their guitarists has joined the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and they're trying to do as much as they can to help both him and also trying to find some work that they need to do with recording of music. So if you're into rock music, if you're into punk music or any kind of music like this, I will leave the contacts to the Cardinal Birds in the description of the video. In any case, thank you so much for watching this. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.